Watch who you fucking, cause people be transferring demons. That sexual energy exchange. The people you fucking do not be having no damn energy. Almost like fucking for change. Pray to God you don't fuck anybody with curses that's in their bloodline. That's a goddamn shame. If you a man, then please just hold your semen up so you end up in the goddamn grave. I'm on semen retention, cause these demons be on a mission. I done got burned one too many times, so now my intuition, I gotta listen. Everybody transferring STDs, that stand for sexually transmitted demons. Y'all might need to go hit up a herbalist. If you dirty, go ahead and clean it. Hey, woman, protect your womb, cause these men be trying to transfer. People be looking good on the outside, but inside they is not handsome. You gotta protect your energy and your body, cause on my mama it matters. You do not want no toxins, so tired of mess your life up shattered. Hey. If it's hard to hold your
Yasharala, all praises to the Most High, Yah. So recently I've been having conversations in reference to exchanges of energy, sacred exchanges of energy, sex, right? And one of the things that has really been coming up is like sexual misconduct, right? One of the things that, really has, me thinking about a variety of different things is energy and the power of energy when you're on semen retention. And for you who don't understand what semen retention is, it's holding your seed, right? Retaining your seed, utilizing that energy to be able to produce things and manifest things in your life, right? Whether that be, and that goes into repentance, right? Being in alignment with the Most High, being in alignment with the Creator. That all has to do with semen retention. And the thing about semen retention, it also clears the mind and the chakras, right? So when you're doing semen retention with fasting for men, you know what I'm saying? Because we are givers and women are receivers, right? So when a man is retaining and holding his seed, that actually clears the mind and clears the chakras where he can become more in alignment with Source, with Abba, with the Creator. But when we are constantly partaking in, giving away the seed, whoremongering, whoremongering is a man who gets around, you know what I'm saying? Or gives his seed out to a variety of different women, right? Without any direct intent with that energy, right? Because the thing that we have to understand about sex itself is energy to create life, right? So the whole purpose of sex is to create and manifest life into fruition through a sacred energy exchange. That's what sex is, right? So when we're talking about infidelity, when we're talking about fornication, right, and adultery, are they the same thing? Let's watch this video real quick.
Sacred Energy Exchange. That's what it is. That's what sex is. So let me explain what this sacred energy is. That's all sex is. The Sacred Energy Exchange. This right here, this is a very powerful energy. One of the most powerful energy sources that you have inside of you, energy body. SEX, powerful force that can be harnessed through creativity, manifestation, achieving extraordinary potential. But you won't know that if you only think sex is and put his penis inside a vagina. That's sex. Then that's all you will know. And that's the trap. That's what they want you to know and believe. So you won't be able to create and have a divine, beautiful life. You are already a creator. You are made in the Creator's image. So why can't you be a creator? Probably because you only think you can do this. Just like
So when we're talking about the difference of fornication and adultery, there are some clear differences that play into that.
I don't know
right?
who need to hear this, but there's no such thing as fornication. You can read the Bible from front to back. There are no pastors, ministers, priests, nothing or no one in the Bible officiating a wedding. There are no marriage certificates in the Bible. There aren't even instructions on how to get married. As a matter of fact, there aren't any scriptures on sex before marriage because sex is marriage. Leah became Jacob's wife after they went into the tent in the evening. As a married woman, the legal process for marriage, as we know it today, is for business and legal matters. But the bond, the love, and the sex is there with or without the certificate. Why buy the cow when the milk is free? First, women are not cows. Second, if all a man wants from you is milk, you have no business marrying that man anyway. If sex can't keep a man, what makes you think lack of sex will? There is no secret formula to this. The only thing that keeps a man is a man who wants to be.
Let's talk about fornication first, right? So, the origins of the word fornication. Let's go into it. In Latin, the term fornex means arch or vault. In ancient Rome, prostitutes waited for their customers out of the rain under vaulted ceilings, and fornix became a euphemism for brothels. In Latin, verb fornicare referred to a man visiting a brothel. The first recorded use in English is in the Corso Mundi, right? The Oxford English Dictionary records a fugitive use as well, the forsaking of God for idols, right? So when we're talking about the forsaking of God for idols, like when you're watching pornography, when you are fornicating, right? It's foreign, meaning outside of the norm, right? That's what goes into idolization, right? When you're watching actual pornography, what you're doing is you're committing idolatry by actually worshiping those images, by actually doing a ritual, which masturbation is, watching pornography. A lot of people don't understand that, but that's really what that is. It's idolatry. So even though you may not think about it like that, right? You're not worshiping a God. Well, the image that you are partaking and watching over and over and over again within the ritual that you're doing is actually a form of worship towards that. Something to think about. So the forsaking of gods or idols, fornicated as an adjective, is still used as botany, meaning arched or bending over. You get it? So like when we're talking about sodomy, that goes into fornication, right? So John Milton plays the double meaning of the word in the reasons of church government urged against what is it? Prelity, right? She gives up her body to a mercenary whoredom under those fornicated, which she calls God or house. So when we're talking about like the actual term of fornication, it's not cheating. That's not what fornication is. So like that's a whole bigger conversation, right? So a lot of the time we were taught that fornicating means having sex outside of marriage. But that's not how it works. Sex is marriage. That's actually when we're talking about a man and a woman laying down, right? In order to be actually consummated within the marriage, you have sex. That's what consummates the marriage. It's not the vow exchange. It's the consummation that happens after the vow exchange that becomes actual marriage. So why do we argue about fornication and adultery, right? Adultery is when you're married, and you have sex outside of your marriage, meaning that that woman is not your wife. That goes into a deeper conversation on what is marriage and what isn't marriage. And not just that, it also goes into the origins of where these terms come from, how true they are to Torah in the word, right? Because a lot of it we judge off of the constructs of Christianity. Well, most of these terms that we talk about and we argue about were invented in the 16th century. What you'll find is in the 16th century, in the 15th century, going into the 16th century, into slavery, these terms were actually changed within the Bible, within government, within politics, in order to start a new world order, right? That's another thing that we have to understand. So when we're talking about, colonization, and when we're talking about like the new powers that were coming into play during that time, that was actually a new world order cycles. Those are some of the things that we have to understand within the ways that the word was changed, the letter J was added on, the ways that government systems changed in the slavery, and utilizing the word, the Bible itself, to be able to justify those things. That was a part of a newer order that was being put into place. So when we're talking about colonization, when we're talking about the new world here in America, that was a new world order that was being put into place during the 16th century. So during the ascendancy of the Puritans, an act for suppressing the detestable sins of incest, adultery, and fornication was passed by the English Council in 1650. At the Restoration in 1660, this statute was not renewed, and prostitution of the mere act of fornication or prosecution, I'm sorry, not prostitution, in prosecution of the mere act of fornication itself was abandoned. However, notorious and open lewdness, when carried out of context of exciting public scandal, continued to be an incidental offense at common law. However, fornication in a private sense was not illegal. Prior to the passing of the Marriage Act in 1753, laws against bastard children became more strict during the 1730s and 1740s in the Victorian era. However, the English working class continued to be able to do whatever they want as long as there wasn't a child who was birthed out of marriage or wedlock. So these are some of the things that we got to keep in mind. Like, the reason why we're talking about the upper class not actually tolerating, right, sex out of marriage is because we're talking about bloodlines. We're talking about money. We're talking about property, right? And we're talking about these bloodlines marrying into one another. So when somebody was defiled, when somebody had a baby outside of marriage, well, that person no longer could be able to marry into another family, right? Because an endowment had to be laid down in order for that family to be able to merge in that. That's property, that's land, right? Those are families coming together. So the ways that we look at marriage now is way different than the ways that that marriage used to be prior to the 16th and 17th century. A lot of the things that we look at as social norms and the ways that people move and operate is different than actually even the Bible in the ways that the terms have been changed. A lot of these terms, when we're talking about adultery and fornication, per the dictionary and per, like, now we call it the charlatan's web, a lot of these terms have been changed in order to be able to actually put laws into place of what marriage is supposed to look like. If you look in the Old Testament, when you're looking at people like Moses, who had multiple wives, and you look at Abraham, who had multiple wives, um, these are things that were normal during those times. David, Solomon, right? They all had multiple wives. They made laws against that. And, like, granted, yes, like, they were either business owners, they owned land, they were more affluent in a variety of different ways, which justified the means and the cause for the reasons that they moved and operated during those times. But one of the things that we also have to understand is when we're talking about Egypt, right? And the reason why the Hebrews were actually enslaved, one of the main reasons why the Hebrews were enslaved, if you read in Torah, in the book of Genesis, it talks about how they were being fruitful and they multiplied to the point that it scared the Egyptians. They were having they're having so many children that the Egyptians were scared that, like, the actual Hebrews would take over them. Kind of similar to what we're dealing with right now within American politics and the reason why the borders are being secured, right? Because if you're not careful, like, the actual root in the community that lives there might be overtaken by those who come from the outside, right? During that time, the Hebrews would be considered those who are immigrants coming from another country and taking that over. So when we're talking about the actual laws that were put in place around a lot of the sex and sexual misconduct, it had a lot to do with being able to control the numbers of populace that came through, right? So when we're talking about that, I'm really, like, wanting you to tap into, like, what we're really talking about with relationships and the reason why so many relationships are hard to keep now. Because when we're talking about the natural urges of man, of woman, in the ways that that was conducted in those times, when we're talking about infidelity it's not the ways that it look nowadays, right? Like prostitution and fornication were things that were frowned upon within the Hebrew community. Those are key things to actually keep in mind. Why? Because that was fornication. You were having foreign sex. The fact that when it goes back into it and it lets you know that fornication was passed by the English Council, prosecution for the mere act of fornication itself was abandoned. However, the notorious open lewdness, when carried out of the extent of exciting public scandal, continued, meaning that they utilized it in the ways that they utilize it now. Somebody who had power was exposed for being sexually immoral. I had a conversation recently with somebody that I work with who was asking, like, would I still follow a leader if they cheated on their wives? And my response to it was, if they're a good leader, what does their sexual misconduct have to do with the ways they lead? Now, there is a discipline in being somebody who's monogamous within a relationship. So I'm not saying monogamy is wrong by any means. That'd be crazy, right? So I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is somebody's misconduct, when you have power, when you have money, when you have influence, you also attract women, right? Who are attracted to that money, power, and influence. So somebody who has power a lot of the time isn't going to be as monogamous as somebody who isn't as affluent, who doesn't have as much influence. Am I condoning it? No, I'm not condoning it. And I think if you told somebody that you were monogamous within that relationship, you should actually adhere to that monogamy. But am I saying, does that make them a bad leader? No, I'm not saying that either. So now when it comes into, sexual misconduct with children and all of those things, there's layers to that as well. But and I'm not condoning that by any means. But what I will say is that somebody in leadership, especially somebody who enforces laws, should understand the impacts and the implications of what that looks like to the greater public and how that impacts them. And I feel like, especially because the children that are being raised right now still have a childlike mindset up to be honest with you, up to the age of 20, 21, some of them do. So somebody who hasn't matured at the age of 14 or 13, who is put into a sexually inappropriate situation, they're not mature enough to be able to handle that. So that does become a taking advantage of situation. That's just facts. But let's go back into it, right? So one of the things that fornicate, the adjective, is still used in botany, meaning arched or bending over, right? That's foreign. That's not the natural conduct of sex. So that became fornication. That's really what it's talking about. It's not talking about you having sex with another person outside of the constructs of marriage. It's talking about it being foreign styles of sex. That's what fornication is, versus adultery, which means having sex outside of marriage. And we can actually do another video that goes more deep into what actual adultery is. One of the other things that I wanted to go ahead and touch on, in the Victorian era, however, the English working class continued to have different set of sexual morals from the upper, the middle, and upper classes. Premarital intercourse was considered acceptable for the working class, but only after an extended period of courtship, and occurred infrequently even then. The couple were expected to marry, though. Disgrace only arose if the female became pregnant and the couple didn't get married. So a lot of the laws that we currently are dealing with right now really has to do with the ways that it impacted money, impacted family when it came to money, and it impacted the union of two families, right? And that's why on a higher level, we're talking about families who had affluence, people who were leaders or considered in governmental roles, or people who actually wanted to purify their bloodlines. That's where it became an issue. So when we're talking about marriage nowadays and relationships, what are we really talking about? We hear a lot of arguments right now about women acting a certain way and men acting a certain way, and that is a reality. We are at the most sexual, immoral time maybe ever in history, just because it's so open, right? You can access anything on the internet when it comes to pornography. When you want to go ahead and call somebody and have them come over, or, the meet and greets, that's things that even happen in biblical times, but, because of technology, it makes it way more accessible. So with the United States, when it comes to infidelity, having more than one wife, all those different things, those are recent, based off of the laws that America put into place, in the ways that we think about it. Even, when we're talking about engagement rings, you go into the history of engagement rings, those were things that were put in place in order for them to sell more diamonds, right? So the engagement ring, the marriage and everything like that, the paper and the ways that the government is able to be inside of your marriage, those were all purposely put into place in order for the government to get their piece of the pie if things didn't work out. Right. And a lot of the time, if you're in a financial struggle within your hustle, things ain't going to work out. So, right here it says the United States, the ethical issues arising from sexual relations between consenting adults who have reached the age of consent, right? That's what I was talking about, right? The age of consent at this point usually is around 18, right? When we're talking about a grown person sleeping with somebody who is going from adolescence into adulthood, would be right around 18, right? Have generally been viewed as matters of private morality, and so have not generally been prosecuted as criminal offense. That's not true, but maybe when this was written. In the common law, this legal position was inherited by the United States from the United Kingdom. Later, some jurisdictions, a total of 16 in the southern eastern United States, as well as the states of Wisconsin, Utah, passed statutes creating the offense of fornication that prohibited vaginal sexual intercourse between two unmarried people of the opposite sex. Most of these laws either were repealed or were struck down by the courts in several states as being matters of personal consent. So these are things that, we fight about, we argue about. He's doing this, he's cheating. But the main thing that I would argue around that is the ways that we look at relationships traditionally, versus, the human nature, right? And the ways that we moved and operated, how marriage has actually been changed versus how it was traditionally, are things that have us emotionally off kill, right? Now, as far as the roles of man and woman, right? When we're talking about, um, God, Christ, the man, the woman, and the child, right? The natural order. When we're talking about that, that's actual principles. And those are actual precepts that are put into place to be able to operate in a world that is structured in the ways that it is currently, to have order and actually understand, like, how the man is supposed to lead through a moral compass, following the Most High's law, statutes, and commandments. And then from that, he leads his family in the ways that Christ led the church. That's usually the best way to actually have a functional family that evolves and grows and is abundant in a variety of different ways. These principles have been proven to work if you apply them and utilize these laws in order to grow your family infrastructure. A lot of the time, we don't understand that actually rules are ways to actually be free, more so than we understand a lot of the time. Now, as far as marriage in the ways that we traditionally see it versus the ways that, it has been conducted in ancient times versus current times, a lot of the time, if you talk to people, well, these are current times and those were back then. Yeah, but people's nature hasn't changed. So if people's nature hasn't changed, we're wondering why it's so hard to stay married and not get divorced. Well, a lot of the time, the reason why it's so hard to stay married and not get divorced, because at the root of who we are as people, that's not the ways that it always worked. That's not the ways that it has been conducted. Were there monogamous relationships in Torah in the Bible? Yeah. And a lot of those monogamous relationships that we see really happened towards the New Testament. And those laws were put in place by the Romans. So much of what we currently are dealing with is we're dealing with a different cultural aspect outside of African traditions, indigenous traditions, and even Hebraic traditions. Now, the Hebrews that we see now and the ways they move and operate have been westernized in a variety of different ways. But when we're talking about the actual traditions and the ways that it worked towards Torah, it looked a lot different in the ways that it was conducted. Now, monogamy is something that I do think is important in the times that we're in, especially the discipline of monogamy, being able to actually be with one person. But the discipline of monogamy is almost like the discipline when we're talking about celibacy and we're talking about semen retention, right? Does everybody meet that? No. But if you do, a lot of the time, it'll show you who you are within your greatest self. Let's finish out with this video right here. It'll be the last one. Sexual energy exchange, sex, and what that really breaks down to. Shalom. Bless up.
Okay, let's talk about Sacred Energy Exchange, also known as SEX. It's commonly known that when we kiss people, we are sharing our saliva, which means that we are sharing DNA information. And, hi. So just understand that when you're intimate with someone, you are basically sharing your DNA with them. Now, this is why retention is important, because when it comes to tantric intercourse, when you understand the three types of tantras that are performed, there's the black tantra, which is a quick, rough, there's no love attached to it when it comes to intimacy, and that is not good for you. And then there's also the gray, which is basically, it's essentially the same thing, just not as I guess you could say, quick. And then there's the white tantra. Now, the white tantra is the most important one because it's long-lasting, pure, romantic, non-violent. And the difference is the aura of the two partners combined when love is present and flowing, and can increase the life of both partners, as opposite to the black tantra, which drains the life force of the couple. So it's commonly known that Bruce Lee practiced semen retention, and even today, many fighters and boxers will retain their fluids for months at a time. And this strengthens the mind, the body, and it energizes the body and keeps the mind motivated and uplifted. So yes, this is why retention is highly important, and also who you are choosing to have as a sexual partner also matters, because this is why there's a lot of energy vampirism going on, where we're just wasting our energy, other people are using our energy. And also that's why when you get into a relationship, you don't want to be in it for the wrong reasons.